Yeah, my name is Nick, or NT on Farcaster. I've been a long time user of Farcaster for a bit over 2 years now. Been in crypto since, I don't know, properly since 2016. I guess I knew about crypto since Bitcoin. So maybe 2010, not exactly at the start, but since 2010 maybe. Um, yeah, I guess like it's interesting
Can
because
I can I
yeah,
actually just
sorry.
I usually don't interrupt this early, but how did you hear about Bitcoin back all the way in 2010?
Oh, it's actually, I mean, it's a funny story. I used to be really into video games. Not so much anymore because I'm now I have a lot of other things to do. I feel like video games can take up a lot of time.
Yeah.
But yeah, back then I was on this video gaming forum, and it was from the same guy who built Garry's Mod, which is this like I don't know if you know about it, but it's like used to be a big PC game
Hmm.
where you could basically build stuff in the sandbox. But anyway, on that forum, someone posted about Bitcoin mining, but this was like super early days. This was before Bitcoin had any value. So it was mostly like computer enthusiasts who built gaming rigs who wanted to like show off that they could have like a higher hash rate. And this was back in like CPU days, it was before like GPU mining was optimized. It was before like any mining was really needed to be optimized because it was mostly like these gaming nerds who wanted to show off that they had like a higher hash rate on their overclocked PC. So
Hmm.
I think I mined about 2 Bitcoin. And this was when I was like 16 or 17. So I was like a kid, right? Teenager. Bitcoin had no value. Like 2 Bitcoin was worth like less than, I don't know. I don't really know what it was, but it was definitely like not any kind of money that I would really think about even like converting into cash or anything. So, and I think all I did was like I just forgot about it and then I lost the hard drive and only later realized that like wow, if I could like recover those 2 Bitcoin, that would be like pretty good money now. So
Yeah.
but yeah, so I guess yeah, pretty early on. And then I guess jumping to today, I'm kind of a full-time builder. I don't have a formal job. I just like working on projects. And the current one I'm working on is ClankFun. ClankFun is a trading app for the Clanker ecosystem, and it's used by somewhere between 700 and 2,000 people a day, depending on the market. So it's fairly, I guess, well used within the Clanker ecosystem. But yeah, Farcaster itself, it's really interesting. The reason I like Farcaster a lot, I haven't been posting there as much as I want to because I've been very busy, very kind of deep into building Clank funds. So I don't spend much time on social media. But the reason I love it is it's just kind of I like that it's a bunch of people who are builders, but also very much like counterculture. Because if you weren't, if you were just kind of a SWE at Google or like a FANG company or something, you're probably not going to be in this like very obscure social network. You're probably going to be on X or Instagram or something like that. What I like about like I feel like there's something forthright about the people who are on Farcaster. Like they're actually passionate about something, and it can be really like weird and interesting things. So for me, that's always interesting. I guess part of that maybe I can dive into my story, talk about kind of what eventually led to me joining Farcaster and building on top of it. Um, I was born in Russia in the 90s. That was a actually pretty strange contrast to like being, living in Europe or in the West, I guess, today. But yeah, it was pretty crazy. I guess for me, it was fairly normal back then. But it was like after the fall of communism, the Soviet Union. Obviously, I never had direct experience living in the Soviet Union because it fell apart in early 90s, and I was born in 94. But still, you could kind of sense that like the country was rebuilding. There weren't really many, I guess, very let's just put it like that. It was a very different life to let's say the same time in like Europe or America. But regardless, it was all I've known. In my childhood, I really loved building things and piecing things together, taking things apart. When I was around 6, my grandfather had this like fairly well set up shack where he had a whole bunch of tools for working with wood or like fixing his car or building like fishing gear. So I was exposed to that from a young age. I used to love kind of just picking up a saw and like going ham on like a 2x4 or something like that. And I was doing that when I was 6. So I was very happy that my kind of late grandfather let me do that at such an early age. But yeah, I guess I kind of saw myself as like someone interested in building or like learning how to manipulate physical objects or something like that, or just building stuff.
Hmm.
So when I was 12 or 13, we at that point I moved to the US with my parents. We actually moved quite a lot. So like my whole childhood, I moved around every couple of years between different cities. My parents are very niche research scientists in different fields, but as a result, they kind of had to move around to do shorter jobs at different universities. So by the time I was like 17, I moved around maybe 12 or 13 times all around kind of Russia, the US, England, and Scotland. So I kind of moved around quite a lot. But yeah, when I was around 10 or maybe 12, I started experimenting with software in a very like basic form. I lived in Illinois at the time. I used to go to the public library and I would read a lot of books there, mostly to learn English because you don't really get like the best formal training in English when you grow up in Russia. It's at least it's not as good as maybe like if you grow up in Central Europe or something like that. But yeah, I used to read a lot of books and I discovered this VHS tape, which was like an instructional VHS tape on how to build a website in HTML. And I think it was meant for like hobby enthusiasts, like maybe, I don't know. I guess there was a bit of like an internet boom in the early 2000s. And so it was kind of cool to like learn all of these new skills. So I remember like learning how to make a very basic like HTML layout for a personal website from by pausing a VHS tape and trying to like read what was on the screen, even though it was like pretty blurry. Um, Watching like C++ tutorials a little bit later on the earliest version of YouTube, like in 2005 or 2006, like right when it first started, or maybe it was even like Google Video back then. It was like, some random guy, filming a 240p video trying to teach you C++, and then you're trying to learn and understand what he means. And it was quite an interesting experience. At the time, I was learning how to code a flight simulator because I was like obsessed with aviation, and I guess I still am now, but I'm just sort of waiting for a good time to learn to fly a plane to become a private pilot. But back then, I used to spend like maybe thousands of hours like um, kind of pretending to fly in this very weird like Japanese flight simulator. It was the only one that I could actually run on my laptop because I didn't have a powerful PC at the time. It was just like a secondhand passed down laptop that my mother gave me. And so
Do you have any idea why that particular thing was like something that you became obsessed with and remain to some degree obsessed with?
I think there's kind of an element. I mean, okay, I guess at the most basic level, many boys to grow up, they just get really excited about machinery, and I was one of those kids. So yeah, I love trains. I really loved airplanes. I used to always ask my mom to take me to air shows, and I went to maybe like a dozen air shows in America. So for me, like flight was just this really fascinating thing. I think there's kind of an element of like skill and control to flying, even on a simulator, that
Right.
you can get that sense of mastery. And so I think that that's what got me really excited.
Did you ever think of doing anything in that space, like work-wise?
Yeah, I think I had like an interest in maybe being like a professional pilot when I was younger, but at the same time, I got so deep into coding that like it very much overpowered that interest. So now I think about it like, I'd love to fly just as a hobby, but it's a very expensive hobby. So I think, um, once I earn a lot more money, I guess maybe I'd be able to afford to buy a plane or um, to fly, every couple of weeks or something like that.
Yeah, I don't know if it would. I don't know if it would sort of if it's missing a few of the key ingredients, but I wonder if like working on autonomous drones or something like that, combining your building tendencies with your flying interests could like if that would be like sort of a good combination or something like that. Obviously you're busy on other stuff, but I'm just sort of curious. It's obviously like there are people who like flying, but thousands of hours, dozens of shows. Like that's a pretty intense obsession, it sounds like. And whenever I hear someone with that, it's like, I wonder what happened to it, basically.
Yeah, I mean, just wait until you hear how much I spend coding.
Okay, okay.
But yeah, I think it's definitely something that I kind of come back to and think a lot about. Like a couple of years ago, I took up paragliding lessons. I think I did maybe 5 or 6 hours in total of paragliding, and I just remember like after that, and I got on a few good kind of fairly decent flights, even in that short amount of time. And it really kind of reignited this interest in aviation, which I sort of like put in the back of my head. It was always like a thing that I thought, hey, when I like grow up and have like the means to do it, I'll do it. So that I can just kind of do it freely rather than having it as a job. And I think, if you're a pilot, it's a very, in my opinion, a very kind of grueling job. You're just like mostly just sitting in this very complicated, huge machine, which is mostly flying itself, and you're basically just like navigating the bureaucracy of like getting everything cleared, like checking the weather, like routing the plane
Right.
around, like, what people. So it's very different to just this, free form, like you're flying like a bird through the skies, doing whatever you want. It's very like it's much more, I'd say, bureaucratic if you're
Yeah.
doing
It's
it that.
interesting. There's jobs like this is, I feel like, a theme for a number of different jobs where it seems like the fundamental thing is like you like flying. It seems natural, you want to be a pilot, but the thing is actually much different than like the reason you went and started to do it. Like a classic example is like a lot of people will like want to be a veterinarian because they love animals, and then they realize like their job is like putting down animals and like having like animals like suffer and stuff. So it's kind of, it's always interesting when like the job gets pretty far away from the thing that it would seem like it should be, which in a pilot's case is flying. It's really not that at all.
Yeah, for sure. And I mean, I think there's obviously different kinds of flying, but the most like default one that you can think of is like a commercial pilot. But yeah, I mean,
Right.
I think
Yeah. If you
also there's
fly
like
a fighter jet or something, it might be a little bit of a different story.
yeah, but then there's a whole other like ethical category to consider, right?
True. True.
But yeah, I mean, it's always been like something that I thought I'd do kind of later in life, and maybe now I'm actually approaching. Like I'm kind of considering. I live in Vienna now, and I'm already kind of looking up schools where I could potentially do like a private pilot's course, maybe the
What
next year or two.
What's like the short version? Having lived in a bunch of different places, Vienna was one place where like I was fortunate to travel Europe quite a bit, but I didn't make it to Vienna, and like I have some ancestry from Austria, so like I definitely would like to, and or would have liked to, but at some point I'm sure I'll be able to go. But I'm curious, like obviously also traveling to a place is a lot different than living in a place, but how is life in Vienna versus whatever other relevant comparisons maybe you can make to other places you've lived or places people might be familiar with?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. So I will preface this with that I've only lived in Vienna for maybe 4 months in total now. So
And
I
did
would
you did you choose it independently like of anything else, or was there like a catalyst for why you should be there?
There's definitely a catalyst. So my girlfriend lives here, and we were kind of long distance, meaning like going between like Vienna and where I used to live in London. And I
Right,
decided that I would move to Vienna because that just makes, a lot of things easier. And I'm not really tied to any particular place
right,
or country or location. So for me, it's much easier. She's doing like an art restoration course, which requires her to be present physically.
right.
So that's why we
That's a
decided.
strong catalyst.
Oh yeah, for sure. But yeah, I mean, I honestly I love it here. I think it's very nice. Before, just to give you some context, I spent 6 years living in London, and London is sort of like, I mean, honestly, it's very similar to New York City. I think it's like the New York City's smaller brother. I'd probably call it something like that.
Right,
It's just very like busy. There's a lot going on. There's a lot of very ambitious people. And there's a lot of like very weird people as well, in a good way, right? Like everyone's
right,
into a different thing, and there's kind of this big kind of pool of people who are passionate about something, but then it's like a whole bunch of vectors with massive magnitude but very different direction, which creates like an interesting environment. But at the same time, it's also very like professionally competitive. People have very busy lives in London. One of the things that I found very difficult is that if you ever want to meet up with a friend, you might plan it and it gets rescheduled like a million times and then eventually cancels. You might not see your friends for months.
Mm,
And especially if you're in a circle full of like very job focused, like ambitious people who just want to like grind, you end up in this kind of situation. But Vienna is very different. I think it's a little bit more relaxed. Like I think people enjoy kind of the lifestyle a lot more here. I think it's yeah, it's constantly ranked in many. I don't know how whether I trust them or not, but these lists of cities that are the best cities to live in the world, Vienna constantly
right.
ranked at the top. But it's very, I'd say, yeah, it's very relaxed. There's a lot of great cultural activities here, many museums, many beautiful art galleries. It was the center of one of the biggest empires in Europe, the Habsburgs. So obviously, there's a lot of history attached to that, and it's very fun to explore this history. I guess for Austria in general, or really anywhere in Central Europe, like we've been traveling a lot around Central Europe, and it's
Mm,
very beautiful. But yeah, I'd say it's more like what you could call. I know it's a bit of a dirty word in the US sometimes, but actually it depends on who you talk to. But I guess it's a bit more socialist than what I'd expect to see in London.
mm,
It's very nice. I find it's very cool, and I'm learning German as well, which is very has been very fun for me.
nice. Well, it sounds like a good spot. I wonder, like, I'm like you can sort of live anywhere, and my wife is the same. Well, with some time zone restrictions, maybe, but roughly we can live in a bunch of different places. And it's just an amazing freedom that I don't take for granted. It's obviously, with for me, it's more so doing my own thing. For her, she got a remote job during like COVID times and sort of like grandfathered into being able to stay remote. And I mean, there's some degree where it's analysis paralysis with too many choices, but at a relatively young age, like I've really enjoyed exploring different places, and maybe we'll continue to explore, maybe settle down. I sort of have this pretty strong interest in at least trying some form of what I call seasonal living, where everyone realized with COVID and remote work that you don't necessarily have to live in, maybe now you do, but at least for a while there, like you don't have to live in New York to work at like the pinnacle of finance. You don't have to live in San Francisco to work in tech, so that you can sort of work from anywhere and be at the top of these, industries. But I think and so you saw people like move from, New York to, I don't know, Tennessee or, California to Utah or Colorado or whatever. But I think the less appreciated piece is that you actually don't like the other thing that having a job in a particular location tied people to was living in a singular place year round. And I think people have underappreciated, or at least like the systems and the way that, mortgages work and whatever, like just in school and all these things, like it's all sort of built around the assumption that people are going to live in one place year round, or if they're going to have, if they're going to live in multiple places, they got to be, wealthy enough to basically own two homes or own one or rent one or whatever, and be able to pay double rent while they're traveling to the other one or whatever. And so for me, I'm really interested in like, can I organize my years in a way where I have not like no home, like a digital nomad, and not a singular home as is tradition, but like multiple places that really feel like home for me because I'm going there like on a recurring schedule year in and year out for some number of months. And like for me, I like being East Coast US, like that's where my family is, a lot of my friends and network from, growing up and whatnot. But like, there's no reason I couldn't spend the summer in Europe or something like that. So it's just always interesting for me to hear about different places. And I think in like the area in which you and I operate roughly with like, types of people on Farcaster and whatnot, relatively ambitious people, future thinking people, whatever. There's some like fear, I think, from some people that, if you don't surround yourself in terms of your physical location with like-minded people, you're going to like sort of lose something.
Yeah.
But for me personally, like everything I've done in terms of tech or crypto or sort of internet stuff more broadly has been like I lived in San Francisco and New York, and wasn't particularly into tech. I mean, not that I wasn't. I was in technology investment banking, but like I wasn't into this cutting edge, like interesting stuff. I wasn't into crypto or anything like that. And then the time that I've gotten into crypto and like longevity and like really interesting, more of this sort of interesting tech stuff, I've been living in I was living in Airbnbs for a while. I was living in Philadelphia for a while. Now I'm living outside Miami, but it's not even really Miami. Like I'm not surrounded by Miami type people with where I am. It's like a very chill sort of beachy area. And so like for me, I've debunked that myth for myself. Like, sure, maybe if I lived, in New York or San Francisco, maybe there's a little bit more energy there or something. But I find that I'm able to tap into like the types of people I want to surround myself with through the internet, and can more so just enjoy like the physical, the nature and like the environment of where I live in sort of other ways. And it can even be nice to be, I think, in a place like, how Vienna sounds, where like you unplug for your computer, you go out for a walk, and it's like a totally different culture than what you're immersed in on the internet.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I think I think a lot of the ways in which we view like your reality online, and your, I guess, overall reality, like I guess what you call offline, has really been changing over the past, like, I guess, really couple decades since the internet started. Like I just remember when I was younger, the internet was really this awkward thing where if you would spend too much time on there, you're probably like some kind of nerd who's into some very specific hobbies for which there's only a critical mass of interest like on the internet and like one
Right.
place on some forum. Now it's like the default. Now, like, the most respected people in like the younger generations, right, are like online social media celebrities. That's what everyone's like aiming at, right? So it's like there's this weird schism, I think, that's forming between an online life and like a real world life. Like I think, the argument for, hey, if you want to be in tech, you should be in Silicon Valley, and if you're not in Silicon Valley, you're just not serious. Like that's an argument that I think is still being perpetuated by people who, spend or like live in SF or something, or close to there. But I don't necessarily think it's true anymore. I think there's like, for example, I've been traveling quite a lot for the past year. Like I've been, in Vienna, but also me and my girlfriend were in China and Southeast Asia for a month in February. And then we were in America before that. Like I'm going to be in SF for 3 months this summer. So we do kind of like, might be going to Uzbekistan for a couple of weeks next month. So we move around quite a lot, even though I'm, kind of based in Vienna right now. I also, go back home quite a lot, to the UK. And I think it's weird because on one hand, there's like this day-to-day like routine life that you live, right, in the physical world, where you wake up and you eat a particular food, you're staying in a particular place, like you go outside, there's a particular type of architecture, there's certain people that you're used to in this particular place. That's like almost like one half of life. And then a lot of my productivity actually happens like on my laptop, online, in this completely different connected conceptual space, where I can be just as present, but it feels obviously very different. And I think there's an argument for this kind of deeper connectivity. Like I was before Farcaster, I was working on a startup that was backed by Balaji Srinivasan. It was like a network state operating system. So it was a way to map out online communities and kind of enable offline meetups for people who held like the same NFT, for example. And so I get the thesis
What was it
around
called?
Little Atlas.
Okay.
It was
Yeah, I worked
over.
with Balaji for a couple of years, so I've
Oh,
helped with
awesome.
a lot of his investments. So
I
I
didn't
don't
know that. That's
remember.
really cool.
I don't know if it was the same time that he invested
Yeah,
in
this was
that.
just
We
a couple of years ago, like 2022, 2023.
Oh yeah, it probably was. That's funny, but yeah, I
It's
know. We
awesome.
obviously we spent a lot of time on IRL meetups, and now he's doing it with Network
Yeah.
School, which I think is awesome. And yeah, I mean, it seems like obviously Balaji's genius, and I think some of his ideas can be a little bit too early. And so I'm hoping that he can pull the future forward a bit with some of the stuff that they're doing with the Network School and whatnot. I know when we were experimenting with some of these things, and you have meetups with NFTs, it's all it's pretty heady stuff. But I mean, we could spend a whole hour on
Yeah,
the
for sure.
application of startup cities and countries and whatnot. But anyway, go ahead with what you're saying.
Yeah. I mean, I no, completely. I was a huge fan of the network state thesis. Like even before the book came out, a lot of the lectures and material on it. But yeah, I mean, I think there's a lot of value in obviously like connecting people from online to IRL. And so conferences are great. I was at Zuzalu, which was really awesome. It was like
Oh, nice.
for people who don't know, like a pop-up city in Montenegro, where a lot of the Ethereum community, but also a bunch of longevity folks were just like living together for a couple of months. And so these things are really awesome, but I think there's not really like I don't really know if you need a persistence like IRL community anymore. Especially when like with travel, I think there's a lot of like really interesting benefit. Like it really kind of opens up your mind to like how reality can morph and shift depending on where you are. Like really, I think there's something beautiful about like waking up in a different place every couple of weeks.
Hmm.
And you don't need to live that as a lifestyle all the time, but I think at the same time, I lived in London for many years without really traveling very much. And I just remember a lot of your days become very routine and time flies very fast. And
Yeah.
you might be working on really exciting things. You might be, getting a lot of things done. You might be doing fun stuff with your friends. But like I feel like a lot of those years very much compress into like in my memory, compress into a small part of my life. Whereas when I go away for a month somewhere, I'm suddenly, I really remember that as like a distinct thing. And the more I started noticing that, the more I realized that like, wow, I'm still young. I'm fairly free. I don't necessarily have to be anywhere. Like I don't have kids. And, if I have kids, I'm probably wouldn't want to just travel all the time because some stability maybe is a good thing. But yeah, like whilst I don't have any of these things kind of forcing me to stay in one place, why not just experience the world, go to different places, try to understand how different people understand life and live life in different places. So all of that stuff is very exciting to me.
Yeah, I think I totally agree. I think variance in general is, especially in like life experience, is your day to day is sort of the key to extending your or lengthening your perception of time. And you hear about people talk about how life just gets like sort of faster and faster as you go, but and the years go by faster and faster. And maybe there's some truth to that. I mean, it even would fit the thesis in the sense that if you take like the most zoomed out level possible, just living in general is like you can't escape the fact that you're living each year, unless you're not, obviously, which is not what you want. So like just the mere fact that you are doing another year of life and you've done, by the time you're 50 you've done 49 already, versus when you're 30 you've only done 29, like that
Yep.
alone may increase the perception, or rather speed up the perception of time. But I think there are things that you can do within that maximally zoomed out like living sort of thing to actually make time potentially not feel like it's getting faster over time. Like if you spend your entire 20s as a lawyer or something, and then you spend your 30s doing a different job and living somewhere different every year, I would bet that your 30s would feel a lot longer than your 20s, even though you've sort of been living for a longer time. And yeah, I've sort of did a little bit of the more nomadic thing for a while. And I enjoyed it. But even that, like I sort of think that there's I've always sort of been intrigued by this idea that there's maybe like you could sort of have like develop like sort of a model for living, like not to oversimplify, but almost just like in a spreadsheet or something, where you sort of open this thing up and it tells you like, what to do that day. The problem is like, you don't want to be told what to do, but you want to have some sort of like guidance that helps to make like life more enjoyable. And the problem with that is that there's like the variance is like a very, very important sort of factor. And so, I'm not a believer, like there's not like some perfect day that I could just do over and over again, or even a perfect week,
Yeah.
or even a perfect month. Like you need to have these varying days within the week, and then the weeks need to vary within the months, and the months within the years, and like
Yeah,
the
for
years
sure.
over your life are going to be focused on different things. You know, one decade might be more family oriented, and another might be more grinding, working really hard, another might be more traveling, whatever. And so it's like it's sort of a unrealistic ambition, but it's something that I've thought about, and to the degree that it's useful, it's mostly in this sort of takeaway that, like, sort of the recognition that I think the variance is an essential ingredient, and like basically surprise, rather than like
Yes.
predictability. And
Yeah.
the question that I've always sort of wondered is basically, could you model in like enough surprise to where it's not actually surprising, like the model is sort of predetermined to some extent, but you're creating the illusion of surprise for yourself in a way that is like sort of delightful. Basically, it's just sort of like this thing that I've been intrigued by for a long time.
That's actually really interesting to me. I've been thinking about it from slightly different angle, but very much like the same idea of, how can you maximize like the perceived interestingness or quality of your life in the
Right.
moment. And I think like it a little bit like triggered me to want to explore it when you mentioned the spreadsheet, because I think honestly, like one of the things I've been uh, grappling with and trying to figure out about my own life over the past year or so is when maybe it's worth me actually diving a little bit into like just what I did in the last 5 years. So I studied computer science at university. Um, was doing very well because I already wrote a lot of code before I went to uni. So for me, it was fairly easy. I spent a lot of my time at hackathons, mostly just building my own things. That's where I learned everything above my degree. Then I had a couple of internships. First at Amazon, realized very quickly that I don't like big corporate environments. Like it was a
Yeah.
very clean, like minimal office, and I just wanted to find a way to have fun there. So, like one of the things I did is I I took they had these like Amazon picture frames that showed like some rules that you had to follow or something. They would just like list these rules and flip them over. So I popped out the SD card and like photoshopped like my manager's face with like a some kind of pointing stick, like pointing at the rules, and put it back in.
Hmm.
He thought it was funny, but like his boss didn't like it because he thought it broke some kind of guideline or something. So anyway, I never got I never got invited to work there again, even though I did a really good job, I think,
Hmm.
when I was interning there. But yeah, so I realized from that point onwards, like, I probably better suited for startups. So I went into startups, into a very fast growing Series A startup that then, as I joined, raised a bunch of money from SoftBank. That it very quickly grew to like a 1,300, 1,500 size org, and I was a product manager, like a group PM there, after a couple of years of working there. And so I was kind of once again stuck in this like bureaucracy that I wished to escape before before starting my career. So then I went into to do my own startup because I got very kind of bored of being a middle manager. And from that point onwards, when the startup didn't work out, it was around the bear market. I sort of just, I was in this place where I had I wasn't working on anything. Like I spent the last like 6 years basically just grinding. And I had absolutely like nothing to do, nothing like that. I woke up every day, I'm like, okay, I'm gonna be working on this. So then
Right.
I was trying to figure out what that means for me. And I started sort of like reading a little bit about like of philosophy, because I was always a little bit interested in philosophy. Like I had some books and I started reading kind of more passionately. Like it was just like a way to occupy my time. And it's something that I found very curious. And just from exploring some of these like early Greek ideas, for example, like, Roman, like Stoic ideas, I sort of started to realize that actually a lot of maybe a lot of the way I thought about work, or maybe even just my routine every day, was fueled by this sort of almost, industrial idea of, hey, we need to organize our life or our productive life in bureaucracies. And so, as part of that, you have to specialize and you have to behave in a way that's predictable. And from all of this, we get like management culture, or just like management as almost like a science now, right? Where you learn how to be as predictable as possible to like make sure you hit deadlines, know how to plan things. And so I feel like just I spent all of this time thinking in a very rigid, almost what I now see as almost like an unnatural way, where it's to be able to maximize how you live your life, you have to plan everything perfectly and make sure you're hitting your own goals and ticking off your to-do list and hitting your KPIs. And I
Right.
realized, like, maybe there's an alternative to this. So I basically just, for a year, I cleared my schedule. I had no meetings. I wanted to do a startup at first, but I'm like, hey, you know what? I'm just gonna wake up every morning and just do whatever I'm most like excited about in the moment and just
Yeah.
follow my curiosity.
Yeah.
And I found this incredibly hard at first because I was always haunted with like, but what if I don't achieve something? But what if like I just, I like give up? Or what if, I just had this kind of everything that I was conditioned with was driving me back into wanting to structure my life more. And so I
Yeah.
almost felt like my curiosity was sort of gone. So it took me an entire year to really fuel it back again. And so this was a year of like not taking very many meetings, not trying to join anything for too long, not trying to commit to anything for too long. But in this
Yeah.
time, I read dozens of books. I've built probably like 12 plus different projects. I learned like one language reasonably well, and now working on Hungarian. And so I've achieved like so many different things, but I never wrote like a plan saying, hey, like this year I'm gonna do this, and this, and this. And if I don't do this, then I failed. So I better like try really hard to do these things. Instead, it was very much like, hey, I'm getting really excited about this now, so I'm just gonna work on this for the next like day, and then see how I get on. So it's kind of
Yeah.
interesting. It's sort of like total freedom to just choose and to follow your curiosity. I found that if you do that for a little while, you actually build way more curiosity, which means you just get very passionate about things and you really just want to try to find out. If you don't know something in the moment, try to find out like what it is or how it works. And to me, I think this is what really improved my life over the past couple of years.
Yeah. It's pretty remarkable how I don't know what the right word, like how much that resonates, how much that overlaps with my sort of lived experience, but like you basically feel like I'm listening to myself talk in a lot of ways. And yeah, I mean, that's been my approach as well in a lot of ways where I did experience, like I started my, not like different career, but similar experience where it was investment banking and did that for a couple of years uh, and quit without knowing what was next. And during that period, like I basically, your writing and your reading and coding was for me like running and writing basically, and was just doing that for several months for the most part. And this was like during peak COVID as well, which was kind of helpful because that sort of societal pressure was maybe a little bit less because everyone's kind of like thrown for a loop during that time.
I
Um,
wanted to ask you actually, for you, if it was writing, one of the things that I'm trying to figure out right now is how to like start writing like blog posts. I see, and
yeah,
I think I follow your blog. I've been following your blog for a while. But I just wanted to like, can you tell me a very short version of your story of how you started writing your blog?
yeah. I think. I mean, at a high, like, sort of to set some context a little bit, this goes back to what I was saying earlier. Like, I completely agree with your assessment of like, you don't want this overly rigid life. And I realize, like, some people might, I don't think you did, but some people might interpret what I was saying about the spreadsheet thing as like leaning way too hard in that direction of like sort of the Brian Johnson like schedule to your everyday, which is like super rigid and like must be followed and whatnot. Like, the point of the spreadsheet for me is actually to sort of like um, build something that allows you to almost never feel like that, where you find these, because you want to take advantage of the things that you find that you like over time, which I think the way to find those things is to do like what you described that you did. It took a bunch of time. It's hard to find these things when you're in the context of a 9 to 5, or even more so working for a startup, really, working really hard and in the group think of all the people around you in those types of jobs and whatnot. So you got to sort of take the time. And as you find those things, like you want to be able to build those things into your life. And so that's where sort of that desire comes from. It's certainly not to do the same thing every day or find like this idea that you can sort of find your optimal day, like we talked about, and just sort of like rinse and repeat. Like I think the seasonality of it, the variance of it is necessary. And so for me, for example, like I really enjoy having seasons of, weeks, months, or even years where I'm like working extremely hard and like being very disciplined on like working out or whatever. And then I like to have, weeks or months or years of, really, it's not years, it's usually like weeks or months of, like being like very social and like traveling a lot and like not having any routine whatsoever. Like I like having like a pretty disciplined morning routine, and then I like having no routine, both for like long periods of time, and then doing enough of the one makes me sort of crave the other again. So that's sort of the seasonality of it. So anyway, the reason I sort of set all of that as context is that writing is something that I very much enjoyed during the season in which I did it and the way that I did it. But for the long term, it's not something that I would desire. So one of the people who sort of inspired me to start writing a blog, what I did was, very concretely for 6 or 7 months, I published a blog post every day or every weekday for 6 or 7 months. And so it's a simple, like sort of, objective or whatever, but somewhat hard to do. You can't like sleep on it. You can't spend a whole lot of time editing. You can't like wait for the perfect idea. Like you just have to put something on paper or, type something up every day and hit publish. And so it really lowers the sort of threshold for something that you might otherwise call publish worthy. Like I wrote a blog post on how to eat like nigiri sushi once, and then I wrote another one on like longevity escape velocity, which is like this concept that you can, if we are able to slower reverse aging faster than we're actually aging, then we could like potentially be immortal. So there's like a lot of, and then I did like Bitcoin stuff, like all sorts of different things, just whatever I wanted to write about that day. But the key rule for me was committing to the cadence of I'm going to publish something every day. And it was a lot easier for me because than it would be now, because I didn't have any audience. Like this was before I created a Twitter like a month or two later, but it was before it was really my entry into the internet was posting on a blog that no one was going to read. And I think not having an audience is pretty important, at least for, it certainly makes it easier because the easiest people to post for is basically no one, because then you're just basically writing for yourself as opposed to an audience or worrying what people are going to think about it. And so I would spend somewhere between, 45 minutes and a few hours every day writing. And besides that, I was just running a lot and like hanging out with my family during COVID and whatnot. And that's like a pretty full day. Writing like takes a good amount of like, it's like a different energy than other stuff. Like you could definitely write for a couple hours in the morning and then have like a very productive day on other work. But it's like hard to write for like 7 hours in a day or something. So that's sort of how I did it. And also having it be week daily as opposed to daily was very helpful for, you always have a break on the horizon, basically, if you were to get sort of like sick of it. And then, like I said, after 6 or 7 months, I felt like I'd started a podcast at that point, which I was like sort of enjoying that more in a lot of ways. I had obviously written a lot at that point and felt like I had all this sort of like pent up stuff that I wanted to write down over the course of my life, that I was able to do so, and like didn't, not that the well was dry necessarily, but certainly got a lot of what I wanted to get out of my head onto paper out, and like felt like I had this really cool collection of posts that I could go back and, first of all, like I never really knew really either of my grandfathers, and like if I could read their blogs from when they were 20 or something like that, it'd just be so cool. But not even just for that, but for anyone in the world, or even just for my future self to go back and read. Like I always thought about it as writing first and foremost for myself, and if anyone else got anything out of it, that'd be a bonus. And so I guess, to get a couple bullets from that, like one is committing to the cadence. And I find like the week daily was really good. But you could do less. It's just like if you do weekly, you're going to just spend like a lot more time on the post. And if the goal is really like output of writing and just to sort of like a lot of days you'll sit down, you won't know what you want to write about. Something will come up. And like that wouldn't have had the opportunity to arise if you had a weekly cadence, which is just naturally going to be like better thought out, more time editing, stuff like that. So if you want to sort of like increase original ideas and overall output and care less about polish and things like that, I think like a week daily or even daily or something like that sort of cadence is nice. And then, maybe doing it pseudonymously. Obviously, if you're really comfortable sharing, like you can just do it under your existing brand. It'll probably help, compound some audience and whatnot, and you'll have like a bigger, group of people to start with. But if you wanted to just remove the barrier to give yourself like the best chance of publishing frequently as possible, you could start it under a pseudonym, and it just sort of takes away a lot of the friction, I think, to actually pressing publish on something that might feel kind of silly.
Yeah, like a lot of the like ego stuff that goes. It's kind of
Exactly.
interesting how, like it's really a new world where you could. I mean, no, I guess it's not. A lot of writers back in the day, like before the internet, like even hundreds of years ago, would publish pseudonymously or like anonymously under a pseudonym.
Right.
Yeah, it's crazy how you can basically construct like an entirely new ego, and then that really like removes a lot of the barrier from hitting publish and from sharing something. Because I guess if you want to, if in a sense, like a lot of writing is really just having an opinion about the world and then attaching your like persona to that opinion. And so for me, I think that's sort of been interesting because I don't like I write a lot for myself. I use this format called Zettelkasten, where you basically write on 6x4 cards and then you file them behind each other in like this tree pattern so that all the thoughts relate to each other. And so I have maybe a couple hundred, maybe 400 of these cards. And it's on all sorts of topics, like mostly just my own reflection on like books that I read or something like that. But a lot of this stuff could be, easily turned into essays, but maybe most of the friction is actually in just doing that, even though it's not a lot of effort. It's like having your thoughts be shared in such a structured way compared to maybe the cast on Farcaster, where it's like, really easy to just type something up and hit post, and like no one's gonna see it if it's not good, so you don't even care so much.
I think one of the things too is like with having these note cards that you've written in the past, it's like always like sort of a different act to go and sort of uncover or revive something that you've done in the past. Like the inspiration with which you originally wrote the note is sort of no longer immediately accessible. And so I don't know, it's like it would be certainly like a worthwhile, like if you have all that content, like certainly it would be great to be able to share it. But I understand if there's, like sort of a lack of motivation to actually do the exercise, because it's sort of like what we talked about with like flying the planes or being a vet. Like the exercise of getting those posts out is actually quite different from writing in a way.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I think it's true. It's a lot of it's like the moment in time where you had the ideas, where that idea is the most potent. And you find this a lot with, like, I find this a lot with building as well. Like some of my best projects have been like the MVP was coded in a couple of hours and shipped. It wasn't like a thing where I planned it to work on it for weeks before release. Like including Clank Fun, I guess, it was like the first version was built in 3 hours, and that's what I launched. And that's what eventually grew into something more like meaningful. Yeah, I definitely find kind of like the spur of the moments to be very important in creating something.
Yeah. So I know, I just looked at the time, and I know we both had to stop here. So it's my greatest fear came to fruition, which was that we would get so distracted with other interesting topics we wouldn't get to the one that I had planned, which was Clank Fun. But I thought, it's been a really interesting conversation, and I would love to just sort of pick up where we left off at some point, continuing down what we're talking about, but also getting to Clank Fun, which you just introduced. And again, my bad that we didn't get to cover that ground today, but we'll look forward to doing so another time if you're up for it.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, no, thanks so much, Jake. And to be honest, I don't mind so much that we just had this very spontaneous conversation about a whole bunch of topics that I didn't know we were going to talk about them either. So definitely keen to pick it up in like a part 2 at some point and talk more about building and ClankFun and Farcaster. I think that would be great.
Awesome. Well, I appreciate the time again. Really enjoyed it, and we'll talk more soon.
Sounds good. Thanks, Jake.
Later. Bye bye.